Welcome to Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and I serve M&A as the Director of Ecosystems Development. Statistics can say a lot of things. So if you hear there are 4,000 churches planted each year in the U.S., you could feel really good. Well, at least until you hear that 3,700 close each year. Well, here in the PCA, we plant less than 50 churches a year, with a remaining open rate of about 68%. We are not growing, we're not maintaining, we're shrinking and reaching our communities. We would need to see at least a tenfold increase if we just want to tread water. Well, what is more, 65% of those in our country have no vital connection to a church, which means that the US has the fourth largest population of unreached people in the world, just after India, China, and Malaysia. In the last 10 years, church attendance in the U.S. has declined almost 20%. Well, with all those numbers, that can be a little distressing to say the least. There is some good news. And today we're going to hear from Covenant Seminary. That seminary has been a proactive force in the PCA as they seek to equip students with the tools necessary to become church planters who start gospel preaching churches and to become movement leaders for church planting and multiplication. Well, with us today is Robert Kim. He's the Assistant Professor of Applied Theology and Church Planting since 2019. He has 23 years of pastoral and church planting experience. And if you don't know who he is on your screen, he's the one with everything behind him saying Covenant Seminary. Also with us is Craig Harris. Craig is a Covenant alum, graduated in 2018, and is planting in Yakima, Washington, launching his church in 2020. Nathan Arnold is Covenant's first church planting track graduate of this program back in just this last December, I believe. After serving as a church planting resident for a year and a half, Nathan is now on staff as assistant pastor at Woke Bridge Community Church, a multi-ethnic EPC church plant in Ferguson, Missouri. And Kyle Lindgren. Kyle serves with Stu Kearns and at Zion Presbyterian Church in Lincoln, Nebraska. He's in his second year of Covenant's MDiv program. Well, before we jump in, I want to say to those who are attending, please, we always encourage you, submit questions. Your questions really helps us get the conversation flowing. So you'll open up the chat box or Q&A box. It is really helpful for all of us. Well, let's just jump in first. Robert, I want to start with you. Just real briefly, give us a little bit of the history of Covenant in church planting, and then tell us about your role and what's happening with the church planting track.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, for having us on this call. First off, your statistics actually are really eye-opening, right? They should remind us of just the need of church planting that's out there. I feel really thankful and honored to be at Covenant Theological Seminary. It's actually something I never thought was going to be part of my story. But for those who know the name Dr. Douglas or Phil Douglas, they'll realize that he's just been the champion of church planting for 32 years before I ever came. And so when I served at Assessment Center, it was always interesting when you guys Covenant Seminary grad, and we would ask him the question, why are you here? And he says, oh, because Dr. Douglas told me I might be a church planter. And so I don't know how many times that happened at Assessment Center. And, you know, the rumor is that he more or less told everyone that they're probably a church planter. So it's like, if you aim wide, you're probably going to hit a couple of good shots. And so that's what Dr. Douglas has done so well, I think, for so many years. In some ways, Covenant's history has really been that, though. So Dr. Douglas can say that there's been over 300 PCA churches, church planters coming out as alumni who have planted that. I try to quantify that, but I don't have the numbers that you have, Chris. But I would say, roughly speaking, that's about 20% of our churches being planted have been by Covenant Seminary grads. And so Dr. Douglas has done that for 32 years. When I came in, I was more or less hired to do the same thing, just say, beat that drum of the need for church planting that's so needed within our country and really around the world. And how do we really get about doing that? So I was in charge and to develop the church planting track, which was the very idea here in Matthew 9, right? So the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. How do we just continue to raise up workers? And you know, what's I think has been really fun. I meet with Dr. Douglas every single month. And so we talk about, you know, the things that he's learned, things that he's been able to see. And he would say more or less, I constantly receive phone calls and emails from people over the time to say, we would love to see a church planner come to this particular. Robert, do you have someone? And he was like, man, Robert, I don't know how many times I received a phone call in my 32 years of the same exact thing. The most recent one for me, I won't mention the planter's name, but it was Cadillac, Michigan, right? And so he was just like, Robert, we desperately need a church planner because we want to do it. And it's always said that, I have X number of students, but we just need more. Right? There's more places that people are asking to say there's a need for a gospel bearing church here. Where are the people that can come and work in this particular harvest? So that's where I'm here. That's why I'm here, praying that the Lord would continue to do that. And yeah, just along for the ride of what Jesus is doing.
Oh, great. Oh, great. But tell us a little bit. I mean, we're going to get to the three guys that have come through or part of the program. But you guys can jump in on this as well, and then we'll highlight you guys a bit more. But tell us a little bit about the program. What does it entail? What makes it unique? Why would I want to sign up for the church planning track at Covenant?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons, and I can definitely state some. I'm going to try to highlight the ones I think are the most important. The first is the fact that, so what you'll see a little bit, and again, I am being a little bit obligatory in terms of my background, but all that to say is I thought it would be helpful. It's the church planning track resides in the MDiv and MABTS. You can do it residential or you can do it online. And so Kyle actually represents the online version. So he's stayed in Lincoln, but he also is able to go through his degree, get his MDiv, and to be able to get through with the track, as well as all of his equipping necessary to get ordained. What I'm really excited about that, it lends kind of the opportunity on twofold, right? People that want to come to Covenant to get some of maybe the culture, the ethos, be with us, and just to kind of have that experience. But at the same time, and this is actually part of my dissertation, was just to get students to be able to say, hey, I don't want to leave my missional context. I want to stay because I have a lot of friends who are non-Christians. And if I move to St. Louis for 4 years, man, I'm going to have to lose that and then reestablish it. And so it allows them to stay within their missional context. Mm-hmm. The other part is we have a cohort. So our students meet on a regular basis in which they're able to pull themselves out and realize that even though, and all of us who have gone to seminary, you'll realize this is like, it's one thing to have students who are passionate about different things, but when you realize that you're passionate about the same thing, there's kind of this really kind of camaraderie that happens. We feel like we're in the trenches together. And so I've tried to draft this vision and saying, let's say, for example, at the end of a church planning class, hey, wouldn't it be great if in 10 years time, all of you guys would realize you went on to plant churches? How amazing it would be that some of this was seeded early on here at Covenant Seminary, and just to kind of see where that might lend to.
That cohort is available both for the hybrid as well as the residential.
Exactly. Yeah. So okay. Nathan and Kyle have been on call for sure, and so we do try to do things on campus as well as bring in our online hybrid students as well. And some of the guests we've had have been amazing, and just in terms of stirring the pot of casting vision for what it was. We had Jim Bland, we had Erwin Ince, we had all these other folks who have just come and just kind of again talk not only about history, but then also encouraging these young folks. And I will say in particular, Terry Geiger and Jim Bland in particular, when he had them on their call, previous M&A directors, just really were so thankful, saying you're doing what we so hoped would happen, which is the stirring of leaders early on to see themselves in the development of the pipeline for future church planning in the PCA. Last thing to highlight, I know you said, Chris, in one of your emails, I wouldn't use this word, but I'm going to use it anyway. But the scholarshiping that's there. And so obviously we want to encourage not only our students to get equipped, but to be able to come out with less debt. And so our program actually has a heavy scholarshiping model. In addition to that, we are trying to scholarship minorities, folks to be able to come in as well, even more so. And so typically speaking, the way I try to draft the statement is if you come residential, you can get a 4-year MDiv at 75% of 1 year's worth of tuition, potentially speaking in terms of meeting all the scholarship qualifications. And then from from an online hybrid standpoint at 50% or 2 years worth for a 4 years degree. And that's assuming that obviously they're staying in their context because they hopefully will have some form of stipending or income, et cetera, and things like that. So it's getting our planters out not only more equipped, but with less debt. And then the last thing, just to quickly highlight, is that what you said in the tagline, to have them see themselves as movement leaders. So one of the things I've been harking on is, I think in the PCA, our phrasing of particularization lends this idea that we think, okay, I just need to get particularized, and that's the finish line. Yeah. But I've said multiplication should be the finish line. And then secondarily to that is to see, how do you see yourself leading a movement of church planting within your particular context? So I am trying to cast this wider vision of saying, hey, if you go, for example, to the city of Ferguson or Lincoln or wherever it might be, how do you see yourself as owning to be able to say that you can lead the health and the vitality of a church planting movement, even within your particular context. And I think that's really important because sometimes, again, we can draw that finish line too early, and it brings out a sense of early stunted growth or a plateauing that we really want to try to avoid.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
Good.
If it's all right for me to chime in, as far as like a hybrid student goes. So I guess I kind of came into the church planting thing for the 75% off. And no, I'm just playing, man. But I wanted to definitely get in with people who had the heart for evangelism. I'd done a lot of that kind of stuff early on in ministry work, but it wasn't church planting. And so I got into the church planting movement kind of not exactly 100% sure of what it would entail to be a church planter, as opposed to just, like an evangelist or somebody who wants to see people come to Christ. And I can say just for myself that the cohorts and listening to the people who have this heart, and the leaders and the leadership and Robert, and I never went away from one of our meetings not saying that, I felt this affirmation that these were my people, right? This is the people that God put me here, because this is the people that want to see people come to Christ. And if you've been slightly, I don't know if disillusion is the right word, but I've been through the evangelism kind of lots of different forms of it. And we always had this really hard time getting people to transfer from our small groups of whatever we would do into an actual church body. And there's just some brilliance to the simplicity of the idea of go plant a church and then reach people with that new planting of a church. And so I've come away from it every time we have meetings more and more sold that this is the right path for me personally. So I would say that the leadership and the people who speak about it have inspired that and put that in me more than probably anything else could have.
And what you're describing there, Kyle, in the context, again, as a hybrid student doing this off-site, you have community built in more easily in residential. Then you disperse, and it's easy for church planters then to be isolated alone. They don't have the structures. But it sounds like in the Covenant program, you've built in a healthy community model that's going to spur on that ongoing health, that it doesn't end when you walk away from the program. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Building more and more.
Each of you, let's just start with Nathan. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You just graduated in December. What's your context, and what's the program been like for you?
Yeah, so my name is Nathan Arnold. So I grew up in St. Louis, lived in Nashville for a bit, and moved back with my wife to attend Covenant. And I came in, and something that was really beneficial for me was I came into Covenant passionate about ministry, but really unsure what that would look like, and passionate about missions, about church planting, about campus ministry. And I wasn't sure what exactly that would look like. And so when I was there, they mentioned, hey, we're starting a church planting track. Would you like to be a part of it? And little did I know I'd be the first one in this church planting track. But what was really beneficial for me was it allowed for discernment throughout my time in seminary as to what was the Lord calling me to, what would that look like? And so through conversations with Robert, through other opportunities, through assessments that we did, there was just continual opportunities to discern where have I been gifted? Where would there be strengths to me pursuing church planting? Where would there be weaknesses, and where would there be opportunities for me to explore church planting, not just from the standpoint of being a lead planter to begin with? And so that's where I'm kind of at now, is through a friendship I developed at Covenant. My wife and I ended up moving to Ferguson and assisting one of my best friends now, Sean Boone, in planting a multi-ethnic church in Ferguson in the middle of a pandemic, in the midst of incredible polarization, in the midst of so much. And it has been a joy and a blessing to be on that journey, and also to still be connected to Covenant and to church planting conversations, realizing a lot of what we want to see. And even, I'm sure Robert will talk about it more later, but he's starting a church plant in Bridgeton, and there's a concerted kind of effort from more conservative Presbyterian denominations of what would it look like to see Reformed presence in the North County of St. Louis that has been overlooked at times. And what would it look like to contextualize how we seek to make much of Jesus in these communities?
Yeah, that's great. So, and Craig, you're the I guess the old guy of the bunch here, as far as you left Covenant in 2018. You're up in Washington. Tell us a bit about your experience and how did Covenant kind of play into that preparation?
I was at the end of the Phil Douglas era. And so I remember once I was playing basketball with my kids on the basketball court at Covenant, and Douglas lived close to there, and he was walking across going home, and he said, I see a church planter. And so that was kind of the first thing. I was like, oh, maybe. I was like, I don't know. It sounds exhausting though. And I have 4 kids, and I'd come out of a pastoral work when I went to Covenant. And so I don't know, I was kind of exhausted but the more I thought about it, and the more I think people affirmed that I should do it, the more I thought, hey, maybe I should do it. And I think one of the things I've learned about myself is I can't trust myself, and which I think the humility we all need to learn. And so I just kind of, as me and my wife prayed about the possibility, we just kind of said, hey, we're going to trust the people around us more than we trust that internal voice. And as we did and went through assessment processes, both the local one that happens at Covenant and the national one, it was affirmed that we should go do this. And I think by the end, we were like, hey, God, tell us no. Don't give us a maybe. Don't give us the 2-year thing. Just tell us yes or no. And he said, and we got the full affirmation, you guys need to go church plant now. And so it was an answer to prayer, because I didn't want to go out on my own will. And I have a tendency to do things on my own power. And so that was really good. So I think there was a community and relationship that happened there. I think one of the big things that helped me in our work here, that there's, like you have that one conversation where that person says that one random thing that kind of sticks with you. It was a conversation I had with Brad Matthews. And we were talking about church planting. I was telling him all these things I wanted to do. And he said, hey, Craig, just be careful that in church planting, you minister to the people that actually come, not just the people you want to come or the people you think are going to come. Because you always have this idea, this demographic or this, whatever. And then the people come look different, and they're different people. And you got to minister to the people that actually are there. And so there's some of those conversations, the relationships, encouragement, and trusting the people around me to tell me what I should do. I think were the big things for me that prepared us for what we're doing.
Yeah. And Kyle, for you in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, again, you're doing it from a distance, so you were out in that area to begin with, I assume, and wanted to pursue this. So tell us about your experience in doing it as a hybrid.
So we've had a couple of back and forths down to St. Louis. It's not a real long drive. It is a long drive though. But as a hybrid student, it seems like I've probably benefited the most. I've benefited the most from the cohort kind of presentations and talks. Also coming down there has been good. So I got 4 kids, and life's chaos. I'm doing full-time ministry as it is. I'm a youth director. And so the idea of doing the hybrid work seemed to be really my only option. And thankfully, our church was very supportive of all those things. I mean, they probably would have been supportive had I decided to pack up and move down there or something like that too. But for me, it seemed very just unrealistic to be able to do this the way that maybe kind of historically was the only way to do it. And so I remember when our pastor Stu, our head pastor here, came up to me and said that they've put the MDiv program on the hybrid. And it was like this moment of like, maybe I can get educated. So I was I was happy for that to happen. And so it's been pretty good. I think in person is probably about as best as you can do. But if you have to do it online, the way that they've set up the community and the way that they've I mean, Robert Kim's awesome, man. You go down there, he's going to let you stay in his house. You know, I mean, not to put you out there like that, Robert, but he will. And
he didn't do that for me, so I don't feel offended.
It's a new thing. It's a new thing. Totally. I don't know. It's new. But
you had Dr. Douglas.
So, but yeah, no, it's been about as good as I could have ever expected it to be, being that I watched the majority of stuff in my office, you know, a couple hundred miles away.
Yeah.
So,
but you're getting also that real-time experience ongoing.
Yes.
The context of the church. We have a couple questions coming in, but I want to ask a question of the three of you. So I'm not hearing any of you went into the program saying, I'm called to be a church planter. That was discerned through your seminary experience. So what was that discernment like for you? Anyone
Yeah, I can speak to that. So first, part of the discernment process, you do not have to have a beard to be a church planter from Covenant Seminary. And just so the video is clear on that. But I think one of the things that was beneficial for me was from the start, I said, I'm young in ministry. I have not had a ton of experience with church planting. This is something I'm passionate about, that I think churches should be about, of people coming to know Jesus. And it's a way the Lord works in drawing non-Christians to the church and to salvation. So I was really from the start being like, I don't want to feel the need to be locked in from the start, because I don't know, and my wife and I are still discerning that. And so it was helpful along the way. We something Robert's built in is checkpoints each year in the track now, where there's discernment that's a part of what you're doing. So you take an assessment, a kind of a 360 assessment, engaging with mentors and with peers and with people who've seen you in ministry. And then it's thinking through what are opportunities that you have to do work similar to church planting, or even be a part of a church plant in a smaller capacity, and discern, is this something I'm drawn to, or is this going to lead to burnout in ministry quick? And I think regardless of what it does, which is really beneficial, is it brings greater exposure to church planting, so that something that I'm convinced of is everybody that's interacting with the track has seeds planted about the importance of church planting, regardless of whether they're going to do that themselves or they're going to move into a church position where they can support and champion church planting in their community and beyond.
Yeah, good. Kyle or Craig, any?
Yes.
What was the process like in discernment? I mean, Nathan did mention assessing processes. I want to get back to that as a critical factor, but any thoughts?
I'm not sure that I've completely come to the full discernment moment yet. But every time I go through, maybe just to reiterate again, because I really do feel it's important, for being somebody who came into it, not sure if I could be a lead pastor, not sure if I want to be a lead pastor, but knowing that I want to see the kingdom grow, and I want people to come to Christ and all those kinds of things. As I've been engaged in the program, if anything it's inspired me to want to be more involved in the kingdom of God spreading throughout this world one way or another. It just inspires that in your heart. The program is focused on that. So I would definitely say, I don't know that I've landed on exactly what level of church planter or of involvement in church planting that I will be. Mm-hmm. But I can say that I will walk away from this experience one way or another, fired up for the kingdom of God to expand.
So what I'm hearing, and again, I've heard this in other people, the same thing. It's not as though, the light has broken through the heavens, the beam has hit you on the head, and the voice says you are a church planter. It's a process, and whether you arrive at that end or not, it's an important part of that process, because what you'd be doing as a planter should be what you're going to be doing as a pastor in so many ways.
Yeah, and let me clarify just real quick too that I don't think in any way, like they've presented through the different people who've come and spoke at our cohort meetings, whatever, the reality of what you're stepping into. And I think that's why the discernment needs to be so like taken seriously, right? Like, because the guys who have been through this stuff that come and talk to us, I mean, they talk about opening churches that don't make it. They talk about the struggles and the reality of what it is, the stress to go through to try to church plant something, the needs and the wants and all of those kinds of things, that it not only inspires you, but yeah, it is, but there is a for real kind of, don't just walk in here and think you're about to open up a church in your own strength.
Yeah.
You know, like this is a real power of God thing to make it through. And so that, you know, that's why I think I'm still kind of, I'm waiting, I'm listening, I'm there. So.
I heard mention, Craig, were you going to say something before I?
No, it's fine. We can.
I heard mention that this, it's a process. It's not a once and done. Yeah, I'm going to be a church planter. About assessing, how in the covenant program do you see this assessing process take place? What happens if you're part of this program?
Chris, if I can speak to that, just because obviously I have a lot there, but we do a lot of assessment in our church planting track. And so one of the things even to keep in mind, because there's scholarship dollars tied to it, we do assessments at the very beginning, and kind of similar to what you're hearing, it doesn't mean to get into the church planting track that you're a church planter. What it means is there's an emerging call of maybe some qualities and competencies that are beginning to emerge that we really do want to encourage along. So what that looks like is before you even get admitted to the track, so you can get admitted to Covenant Seminary, but then you have to get admitted to the track, and that requires an interview with me, of which I kind of walk through students, et cetera, and try to look at basic competencies. In addition, every single year, the students, and all of them don't do this to fidelity, but if they do it well, they're going to take an assessment every single year, and we develop learning contracts. So again, if it's a 4-year program, between years 1 and 2, they'll be given a learning contract from that assessment to say, here are some things we really want you to address on, right? So for example, let's say someone's lacking in evangelism or preaching. The challenge for that next year is, how do you engage more faithfully with these particular tasks so you can grow? And the idea there is that we're not letting our students come out at the end to say, hey, are you a church planter or not? The other kind of beautiful thing about that is Covenant Seminary has been blessed to have Jim Hatch, who's actually been here in St. Louis. And so the Readiness Summer, which actually happens to be this weekend. And so obviously anyone on this call can't join, but we do it every single year. And obviously our students are a part of that. So this weekend we'll have 4 couples come to Readiness Seminar. And what that's always been used by M&A is just that early kind of down the line saying, hey, it's a green light or a yellow or red light. Should you keep going? Should you keep exploring? And if you are, here's some great things, and here's some evaluators that are helping you along the way. And as you know, Chris, Covenant's also now recently decided, hey, we also want to invest in the assessment process. So the great thing about a lot of our students, if they're graduating, like for example, Nathan, if he wanted to, he could literally in July this year just stay in St. Louis, come to Covenant's campus, and the assessment center is actually going to be held on our campus. And so we have a strong value toward that. And all that to say maybe is this. I obviously love and value assessment for a lot of different reasons. And then at the same time, we need to constantly look through what we're assessing. And those are some of the conversations that we've had over the years. But we value it, we believe in it, we do it well. And again, it's with that grace-centered mentality of really trying to build up our students, kind of similar to Kyle. You may be unsure, but let's keep kind of encouraging and kind of fanning into flame some of the things that God might be doing in your life.
Good. You mentioned with assessing, and a question here from Drew, do you recommend the PC Assessment Center for all church planters? Now, of course, if I'm going to be answering that, the answer is absolutely, as one of my jobs is overseeing the PCA Church Planter Assessment Center. So I would say a strong yes. But how would that fit into the program as well? You answered that a little. And for like Craig, you've been through, correct, the assessment yourself, the assessment center. Yep. Maybe speak to that as part of the process.
Yeah, I would. If do not plant a church unless you go through the assessment center. I don't know how to say it more strong. I think because, like I said, we went there feeling, somewhere in between, but we just wanted an answer. And coming through the assessment center and how intense it is, and it's a unique time to spend those 3.5 or however many days cooped up in a hotel, feeling like Big Brother, like people are watching you on cameras. in your room. And but I can't say how valuable that was for us. And even now, like, you have your bad days, and you look back and you remember, no, these people said this about me. I think it's true, even though right now I don't feel like it's true. And so those are some of those steps that, I would never let someone church plant here out of our church if they haven't gone through assessment.
I think it's similar questions from Jenny Dorsey. If you're married, how have you included your wife in the process of discerning for church planting? And I guess with that, is that part of the process or an aspect of the covenant program? That how are the spouses engaged in that whole process? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pop in.
Yeah.
As far as what's required down the line or all those things, Robert Kim probably knows that better, but I can definitely say from the counsel that I've received from both my own kind of presbytery, the session and so on and so forth, my pastor, and just all the people at Covenant, Robert Kim, if your wife doesn't think that you ought to be church planting, that's a pretty strong indicator that you probably ought not to be church planting. At least that's an indicator, right? Like that's something to be taken extremely seriously. But that's for any kind of ministry. I would say is probably pretty wise as well. And it does seem like there has to be a we. We are going to church plant, because the stress is with the family, and so there seems to be a pretty good reality. I will say a funny story. So my wife came down to St. Louis to campus with me for one of our in-persons. And I can tell you this, definitely read the books beforehand before you show up for the intensive, because there is a lot of info that's going to come at you. And it's just like we learned a lesson as far as like engaging for the kind of like the whole process of it, as opposed to just trying to jump in here and there. And so, but anyway, it's been really good as far as that's concerned.
No, that's great. Yeah,
I would say just real quick, I think that one of the covenant strengths is the inclusion of wives in the process of just discerning pastoral ministry. And I know my wife felt very supported at her time at Covenant, and even through the assessment process puts a strong value on the wife. And there's some people that were in our assessment that because the husband and wife weren't in unity on calling, they didn't get approved. And I think that was probably the kindest thing for them, because it would have destroyed them. And one of the things and the best thing for us, and I would say is broader than just a husband and wife, but as a family, especially like my oldest is my daughter, who's 13. And someone gave me some advice that, hey, this is not just a husband and wife, then this is a family calling, and you want your kids to be excited about it. And so we spent a lot of time before we planted with our children, talking to them, and they were starting to dream about, hey, how would I be involved and use my talents? One of my kids wanted to be, to do the church pranks was his thing. And, so one of my kids started church planting in Minecraft. He started building churches in Minecraft. So, so it's kind of getting your whole family involved, engaged, I think is healthy.
No, that's good. Yeah, when it comes to that readiness seminar, I mean, it really is geared. It's for if married couples. It's not a solo thing. So, encourage you to anyone, and you can participate at whether you're a Covenant or student or not. Anyone can come to the one at Covenant. You're doing it. You can be doing it every February. Is that the goal, Robert?
Yep.
Yeah, and we have one here in the Wisconsin, Milwaukee area in May. Every May, they're all over the country, and so encourage you to take a look at those. We have some more questions coming in here. Eric Freeman had asked early on. He said, "We're starting a church planting residency at our church plant in Cadillac, Michigan." Wow, I think we just heard about Cadillac. We didn't mention the name. Now we have the name. If you had the opportunity to do church planting internship or residency, can you talk about how that experience helped prepare you for future church planting? What helped? What didn't help? So, did any of you have done a residency or an internship in church planting?
Yeah, I did a 2-year residency before we planted, and it was immensely helpful for a lot of reasons. For one, it gave us 2 years near where my wife's family lived. And so living across the country, just having and my wife's Canadian, so just being near her family was nice. But also on the preparation side, it gave me a chance just to talk to people who've done it before and just pick their brains and see how they did it. And it kind of gave me time to build systems. So by the time we started our church, I already had some systems built that needed to be adjusted, of course, but I had time to really think through the various aspects of what kind of church we were going to plant. So it gave us time to really think about that, even though where we ended up planting, it's about 4.5 hours from where we did our residency. It gave us time to really prepare well for it. So,
Yeah.
And I'll speak to that. Mine was, I did a residency that was somewhat not a traditional residency in that I came on even before we had launched public worship. And so mine was from the beginning, from the outset, being more of a part of a team that was church planting to give me from pre-launch, launch, post-launch experience through the process. And that has morphed then into now where I'm on full-time at the church plant. And that was part of the what we envisioned from the start, but wasn't necessarily for sure. And so there was meant to be discernment in. But I think the best thing about it was having opportunity to be involved with every aspect of the ministry that was going on, from evangelism to discipleship to kind of leadership development to fundraising and financial development. I think the more they can be involved with all facets that are necessary for a church plant to run, the better sense they get of what all that requires, and the better sense there is to know here's what that entails, and here's how you go about doing that, and whether you cut out for that.
No, that's great. Good. Well, a question here we also have from Rich Holland. As part of the church planting track, is Covenant exploring new ways to think about church planting in a post-Christian environment by reaching non-Christians who then become early members? That is, are we thinking any differently about church planting now than we did 10 or 20 years ago? Robert, what are you seeing in the sense of change? I mean, I will say, Robert, there are a few people that have as many ideas and simultaneously in rapid fire than you. So I'd love to hear. And that's a great compliment.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in short, I've answered in the chat, but I'll just try to do it a little bit. In terms of the ideas, yeah, I think we do need to revisit the statistic that you gave earlier, Chris, even in terms of 50, right, that the TC has been planting over the years. Last year, I've written an article or blog post recently on this, but in 2020, we had even a more down year. And so all that to say is this: the missional need of church planting is at the highest that we've seen in our denomination. So we do really need to ask that question, not just in terms of 10% growth. And one of the things I'll just say about our track is, I'm really passionate about it because I think we're answering prayers of, again, a lot of people like Eric in Cadillac, Michigan, to say, well, let's raise up these workers. But again, so God has graced us in a pandemic. I came in 2019 and we had 3 students. Nathan was one of them, right? So we had 3 students, and we're probably about 30 students right now. So the Lord has been gracious with that. Here's been my prayer for Covenant Seminary, and I try to help some of the other seminaries do this as well in terms of saying, here are the needs. If we can all pump out 100 church planters a year, we're probably beginning to turn the tide in terms of actually saying we're advancing the kingdom where needed, in particular the growth that we're seeing throughout the country in all these different pockets. In order to do that, we will need different models. And so I'm going to use the example that some people have said, Robert, you're considering planting a church? Yes, Robert, somehow, and this I'm going to talk to spousal cooperation. Your wife said no from the very beginnings, so you've been waiting patiently for her, yes. And so by this past December, she finally said yes. She's like, honey, I think we should go plant a church. And so now we just announced in January 2022 that we're going to consider planting this church. The Lord has been gracing us with a lot of different things. But the model itself will be what I've espoused is a co-vocational church planting model. So just to make sure we make quick distinctions, bivocational versus co-vocational. Co-vocational says having a job that assists with the very mission of the church, whereas bivocational is just you have a job that pays the bills, right? That's a quick way to maybe make that distinction. But a co-vocational model says, hey, Robert, you can probably raise, let's say it's $50K for the entire church budget. You don't have to worry about the salary of the planter because you're already supplied a salary from your particular job, in this case being a Covenant Seminary professor. And so our timeline is really expedited. I was at our M&A meeting yesterday for our presbytery, and one of the elders who was in the room said, Robert, you're going to have the fastest timeline of any church plant proposal that we've had in this presbytery. But that's exactly going back to this idea of thinking outside the box of new models. How do we think of ways to be able to say that we reach, and specifically to the question about reaching non-Christians, to me, that's not so much a new model thing. That's actually recapturing the vision of the church, which is, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Chris Wright, who says a missional church is an oxymoron because every church is missional, right? To think that somehow a church plant should reach non-Christians versus a regular church shouldn't reach non-Christians, that's a falsity that we need to recover and say, no, that's not true. We're all called on mission, right? That's the nature of the church. And so in some ways, I think the question, although good in the sense of asking a question about new models, to say that, church plants need to get after new non-Christians, it's actually every church needs to get after non-Christians. That's what produces the health within the church that we need to get at.
No, that's great. Any thoughts from you guys? Let me just maybe ask from all of your perspective, what would you say are the qualities or which we look for in a potential church planter? If someone's kind of wondering about it, what should stand out in that discerning process?
I mean, this might be applied to all ministry people in general, but humility. I was impressed with Craig when he said that he doesn't trust himself and that he was, but that he was really listening and willing to listen to the people around him, because very often I would say the same is kind of for me with the church planting track specifically. People around me have been encouraging me and telling me that, I think this would be a good avenue for you to go down. And so the humility to say that it's possible that you don't know what God has in store for you. And it is also possible that the people around you have insight into you that you might not see. And also just the willingness to learn and to grow and to know more from church planting and all that other kind of stuff too. But humility would probably stick out to me.
Yeah, that's great. That's often when the stereotype of a church planter, humility usually doesn't come in, because they're the audacious sorts that say, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to do something that hasn't been done. But I think that is a great first step, because if you're not humble, you will be humbled. That's for sure.
It's a painful lessons, man.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing novel about, I tell us in our membership classes, we're not doing anything novel here. Nothing we're doing is new. So I don't know. I don't know that the qualities of a church planter are that much different than a pastor, just the quality to look for in a pastor. I think I'm probably potentially in a minority on this. If someone told me that they had to church plant or they would die, I would never encourage that person to church plant. I wouldn't encourage them to die either, just to be clear. But I think that the kingdom of God doesn't need us. God's kingdom will grow because that's what God's kingdom does. And he graciously invites us into that work. And so I think that humility piece to say, God, is there opportunity for me to do this? Great, I'll go do it. And that willingness, I think it's more of that humility and a willing spirit to do insane things that don't make sense because God has called you, and that kind of ability to live by faith. And so I would look at someone's stories like, have they had to step out in faith at all in their life? Or has everything been written down and planned out and gone according to plan? Because those kind of people probably aren't ready for what's about to happen when you church plant. I kind of envision, things for us have gone pretty well in worldly terms. But I kind of tell people it's kind of like grabbing on the horns of the bull, and I'm just kind of along for the ride is how I feel. And I think that's probably a good spot to be.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think there's not much I would add to that. I think Craig said, the importance of the qualifications for leadership in general, and especially focused on character. I think church planting is a place where identity just really is shaken in a lot of ways, and is shaped in a lot of ways, either by successes or failures. And so I think a deep rootedness in an awareness that we're not needed, but God loves and cares for us, and God graciously invites us to be a part of his work. I think a strong understanding of that flows into the work that we do. I think there's always a tension in church planning of you want to be able to cast vision and you need to be able to do that. But if you present yourself as the greatest gift to your community as though it's inherently you rather than the good news of the gospel, you set yourself, your people up for failure.
Yeah. Good. Here's a question regarding someone who's doing a replant, an old church, and wanting to grow in wisdom. It says that it seems as if this program could assist people like me who are already leading a church, but looking to grow in understanding and wisdom. Are there others like me who are doing this? Again, often talk about church planting and church renewal, and they're really very much part of the spectrum and intertwined. If a church plant isn't the only one seeking non-Christians, an established church had better be doing that. They're not fulfilling their calling. So in many ways, the DNA in a church plant should be the DNA in a church renewal. Any conversation, Robert, as far as with people that are in an established church but wanting to get the ethos, the mindset of a church plant and moving that forward? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I think it's a good question, which is, and you're landing on the right answer, which is simply to say is that, what I think good, healthy church plants do are good, healthy practices of church, right? And so what I love about some of our students in our church plant track, for example, some of them are saying as they get further into the program, it's like, hey, Dr. Kim, I'm not sure if I'm actually going to be a church planter. But one of the things I've loved and valued about being in the church planting track is I'm actually more equipped now to be a better pastor. And so even if they go into a church that requires revitalization, the way that they're viewing church now is from this lens of, let's say, a missional understanding or kingdom advancement, or even this idea of kind of gospel dynamics that are all part of kind of some of the things that we do. And, there's so much that I could get into, but all that to say, the things that we teach them, more or less saying, I've learned how to be a healthy pastor, and that also means a healthy planter. And so one and the same. And so even making the dichotomy between was once viewed as like church planting as church growth, whereas now we consider more church planting as church health, and healthy practices again will lend not just to church planting, but again toward revitalization. Because what is revitalization? It's bringing the church back to its health, right? And here's something that I will say that I think is really beautiful is, what we're seeing is as we continue maybe harking on this message, and I'll give the recent story. I'm consulting for a church that, after 120 years, they're beginning to consider their very first church plant, right? And what I love about that is they're finally be able to say something to the effect of like, we thought we were too old, right? It almost echoes Sarah in scripture, right? Like, kind of woman this old, bear fruit. And the short answer is just as it was. It's like, why doubt? And the beautiful thing about maybe a revitalization is to say, not just get it back to health, but what if in that revitalization work, it even got to the point where it said, hey, we've caught this vision that the harvest is plentiful. We've caught this vision that there's more people that still need to hear and receive and respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let's get out there and let's go plant a church. And again, over and over and over again, that's what it is. It's the message that brings back health and vitality to the body of Christ.
And you also brought up something really good earlier, which was that the mission of the church, being missional should just kind of be what the church kind of is. And one of the things I've taken away from what will go forward from this church planting track for me, if I go out there and plant, or even if I'm a part of one, is to plant another church that wants to do the same thing, and to start multiplying the idea of outreach, of bringing new, so when you're church planting and then you're teaching your people to want to go out there, I mean, you're also revitalizing the old method of, get out there and build the kingdom of God kind of thing. So.
Absolutely. I tell my people that, we came here to plant a presbytery, not a church. And it's easier where we are because the closest PCA church is like a couple hours away. But we already have someone actually in the church planning track from our church that's doing a distance ed, doing the church planning track with Robert. So we got 3 guys doing distance seminary education. So I think it's part of that culture. You're trying to, like you said, you're trying to rebuild that culture and start from the ground up where they expect it to happen. And I think that's that's where church planting is super helpful. It helps, you can build new cultures where people expect you to do stuff. It's not unusual or abnormal anymore.
Like it kind of always begs the question what you're describing there in Washington, just all over the country. Robert, from all your studies, what area, city, county in the U.S. is oversaturated with churches in which we no longer need any more gospel witness being newly developed?
The short answer to that is there's none. And I'm going to give you the example. I was just in Memphis the previous weekend. I was teaching and preaching, and a couple of the students at the seminary there were just saying the same thing. It's like, I don't think there's a need for a church plant. But once we started talking, once we started envisioning, they're like, man, there's such a need. And what if we kept the multiplication of churches throughout to reach every Memphian, as they like to call it? And, that's what's fun, is if you can begin to see like somehow that your eyes would be open to what the harvest is. And just to get a quick anecdote, my first contact with the city of Bridgeton was me sitting down with the mayor and just asking the question, Mayor Terry, is there a need for a church here in the city of Bridgeton? Bridgeton has about 15,000 people in terms of population. He's like, no, Robert, I think we have enough churches. So I said, hey, what's your largest church? Fifi Baptist Church. How many people were in that church? About 200, 300. And so then he started doing the math, and he began to realize, he's like, wait, if my largest church has 300 people and there's a city of 15,000, oh, wait, there's a lot of people who don't go to church. And he's a nominal Catholic. And what I loved about this meeting, at the end of the meeting, he's like, Robert, actually, I would really love to see your church come to the city of Bridgeton.
Oh, yeah.
And this was within an hour to convince him to say, for him to go from, there's not a need for another church in my city, and in an hour be able to say, hey, if you think about the missional needs, there's always going to be a need for a church, right? And so this is where I think it's really the fun part of casting the vision for church planting, is sometimes convincing people, but once they're able to see by faith this idea of, again, the harvest is plentiful, it's everywhere, right? I was in Philadelphia for 13 years. I had 22 church planters on the ground working in different parts, and I loved it because they were saying like, hey, 22 guys trying to do this, but guess what? We needed more, right? And even though we had a seminary, we had 2 seminaries in the city of Philadelphia that were right there, more than 2, but 2, let's say, evangelical seminaries. But all that to say is we still needed more. That's just the reality, any place you go to. Hey, Chris, can I highlight one thing just because? And so, one part about the curriculum that I forgot to highlight were field trips. And that was part of one of the questions that you asked.
Yeah.
And here's the fun and exciting thing. So before, Dr. Douglas, and God bless his heart, great man of God, but he was very kind of limited to think through like church planting field trips. And what we do is we go to cities to catch kind of what God is doing there. So we talk to church planters, see the network, see what's going on. And then what was a natural byproduct of that is our students would sometimes consider that place in terms of a call to, let's say, Nashville, Wisconsin, or wherever. When I got here, I was a much more bigger guy in terms of thinking through the nation. And so I'm just trying to stretch our imagination and saying, could we go outside simply the Midwest? And so we want to say, by all means, we serve the Midwest and we see our part in the Midwest, but we also see ourselves as a larger part of the fabric of seeing the kingdom. And so we've been inching out. We were supposed to go to Atlanta in April of 2020, and then the pandemic hit. And so that unfortunately got canceled. We recently went out to Denver and Colorado Springs. And exciting for fall of 2022 is started reaching out to Redeemer New York City. And this is going back to connection and collaboration. So this is now RTS New York, RTS or Charlotte, where Dean Faulkner's at, and then Covenant. All of our students are going to go for a field trip there just to learn what God's doing in the city of New York City, both through Redeemer Presbyterian Church, city to city, and just gleaning. And so part of our curriculum is not just, again, in-house, but also seeing boots on the ground, how church planting is done in all these different contexts. And so really looking forward to seeing how the Lord would bless that.
Yeah.
So when are you going to come to Yakima, Robert? Come on.
Make it happen, Craig. Will consider it. I mean, Seattle for sure. Yakima, you're going to have to convince
Seattle doesn't need anything, man.
Yeah,
Seattle's lame.
They have churches there already.
I think there was a podcast that might have highlighted the need for a church there, but it's
But a quick question in a negative form: who shouldn't plant a church, or what are the wrong reasons? How would you dissuade somebody? As you said, Phil Douglas never met a person he couldn't try to talk into being a church planter. But what are some of the things we should always consider? Maybe not, or that is, what are some of the wrong motivations that can go into it?
Well, Robert Kim, right off the bat, when I was talking to him and interviewing and trying to get into the church plant, definitely helped me understand something that we're not trying to do. And that is, we're not trying to just shuffle the deck. And if you understand what is meant by that, we're not trying to just take Christians from other churches and just have a new cool church to be at. The idea of church planting is because you want to see the kingdom of God expand. And it's not even necessarily just because you want to see your denomination expand. It's that you want to see the kingdom of God expand. You want to see people come to Christ. And so I would say, if there was one that I came right off the bat with, as far as probably not the right motivation, is if you're church planting without the heart desire to see people come to Christ, even though I know that's kind of there for every person in some way, but that's not the focus of why you want a church plant. I would say that's probably misguided.
Yeah, no, that's great. Other thoughts or warnings?
So what I highlighted there in terms of the podcast, I think in terms of the character of the planter, by all means, is something that we really would say is that if your character is not formed, if you don't have the heart of Christ, in particular, not only for him, but also for the mission and the people of God, by all means, I think that's a stark warning sign, and just evidence in terms of what that revealed, and something that we really do need to get after, right? Which is to say, have the heart of Christ for yourself and for the people. Let that lead into the mission of God as that unfolds. This is definitely something that we really need to get after. Yeah,
and that ties into what, Kyle, you said earlier, the issue of humility, of knowing this is not about you, but about God being at work. Well, we just have go ahead, Craig.
I would say one tangible thing that comes to mind, there's always exceptions to any of these things, so don't hear what I'm not saying. But I've been more and more convinced that, being a little bit more experienced pastorally is super helpful. I think church planting is one of the hardest pastoral things you'll do. Why are we sending our guys with zero pastoral experience to go church plant? It doesn't make a ton of sense. And like I said, that's not to say there's not exceptions to that rule, but I tend to want guys to be a little bit seasoned in pastoral ministry, have some skin in their marriage game, and before heading out to one of the hardest pastoral things you ever do. So,
no, I think part of that is through the assessing process.
Yeah.
And again, it's a process, not an event. It's a process. And just notice here, Jenny Dorsey just came to the us panelists, but just the idea of getting some coaching. She is a coach for spouses, and she volunteered another person's name that I'll let that person volunteer her, but no, it is I think a vitally important part of that process. But it just in the very just wrapping it up real quick, real brief. What is your audacious goal for 10 years from now that you would like to see?
I'm just going to reiterate what I said earlier. Yep. I want to see at least 100 church planners graduate from Covenant Seminary every single year.
All right.
And that's my vision and my goal.
Yep.
And here's the thing. I wish every seminary institution would say the same thing.
Yep.
Because that's the only way we're going to turn this tide, like I said. And, if everything that's true of the data coming out from the pandemic, all the fracturing, the 1 in 5 churches, according to Bonner, that might close because of the pandemic, the gap that we've seen before, all the statistics you mentioned at the beginning, Chris, the need is at the highest. We really do need to address this. And so, and my exhortation would be for those on this call and for those who at one point listened to it, would you join in that prayer of Christ in Matthew 9? Mm-hmm. Let's pray that the Lord would raise up these workers.
That's great. Other guys?
My audacious goal is to get Covenant Seminary to open up a Western campus in Yakima, Washington, to train up local leaders out here, and to have 5 church plants sent out. And we're not even 2 years old, so we got some time. But yeah,
that's great. All right, Kyle or Nate, any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, my goal would be to see. Our hope is 3 to 5 leaders from within our community and context, planting churches in more predominantly minority communities, and to see Reformed church presences grow in places that have been consistently overlooked.
Yeah, I think I think the track has put some emphasis in something to me that would just be the longevity of saying that I have church planted, that I'm still kicking, 10 years from now, that I'm still fired up about doing it again, that I'm still fired up about the Lord and walking with him and seeing people come to Christ. And I think that the longevity in ministry is something that they focus on pretty well here as well, because you don't want to just start something you can't finish, put your hand to the plow, don't look back. And so you got to be trained well in your heart and mind and whatever by the Lord. So
that's great. Well, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Next week, we will be looking at rural church planting. Alan Foster, Corey Pelton, and a number of other planters in rural context, another area of great need. So please join with us then. Until then, thank you all for joining us. God bless. Take care.
Thank you.